So with the solar labs, this was about 6 months after I'd worked on Chumbak. I'm just gonna open up the presentation deck because I think that explains what my work better.
Awesome.
So with the solar labs, I worked with them for about 4 months, 4 to 4.5 months. This was a contract project. It was not an internship per se. Um, I was a product designer, a sole product designer over there. They did have someone who was working on product, but he was not a designer. So that's pretty much the outline of what you need to know about the solar labs.
Okay.
So what was the solar labs, right?
Right.
So I felt like it was very important to give a lot of context to this project because this is fairly ambiguous. It took me a month to get used to it, and to expect someone else to get used to it in like a 20-minute presentation, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So they were building an enterprise tool to help solar engineers evaluate the validity of their solar plans, if that makes any sense. So basically, their mission was to accelerate the country's transition into solar energy. And the way that they were doing that was by helping solar engineers, who are people who design the layouts of panels for every new house, helping. It was basically like they were building a software to enable that, right? And my role was that I worked as a consultant. I think I mentioned this before, with a cross-functional team. There were lots of developers and product managers, but I was the only designer. I ended up doing a lot of, I would say that my key role was actually facilitation. I don't think I did a lot of design. I did a lot of data visualization. I did some data visualization, some product design, and a lot of research again. So in terms of process, we started off with a couple of alignment meetings, and then this translated into shadowing the users, and followed up by a bunch of interviews. And then I did a lot of facilitating of design decisions, like helping, because I realized by then that they knew a lot about what they were working on. They had the solutions. You just had to like nudge them in the right direction to visualize it. And finally, the last step was designing plus iterating. So as you can see over here, I would say that design was like secondary almost. If you look at this graph, you can see that I spent most of my time facilitating, a lot of time on research and shadowing and interviews, and very little time actually designing.
Right.
So to begin with, I started off with alignment meetings. Back then, I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but that is essentially what I was doing. Back then, I was just kind of like following this hit and miss process where I'd be like, okay, let's try this. That's it. Okay, let's try this. And that failed as well. So that's kind of how I would move about it.
Right.
But we started off with an alignment where Siddharth, who was the CEO of the company, sat down and explained the difference to solar design engineering. And I'm not going to walk you through it because it's very complicated, and I don't think we want to dive into it into that fidelity. But basically, as you can see on the right, it takes about 7 days to work through one proper iteration of a solar design layout. And a few key problems that we identified was that, one, the initial reports, it takes about 5 to 6 days to build a rough initial report. Two, the tasks were very repetitive. So there was a lot of time wasted on deleting extra lines, replicating objects, just like really mundane things that you don't really need to think about. And three, generic software. These tools weren't built for solar products. They were built for architecture, or else they were built for just like 3D modeling. Maybe it wasn't a dedicated tool, right? So over here, what I've tried doing is that I've tried setting context right up front to substantiate what the problems are, and then follow that up with how I solved the problems and what the solutions finally were, right? And I chose to keep it at 3 problems. It was a 4-month long project, so there were obviously lots of smaller problems that I solved,
Right.
but these were 3 initial things that I discovered, and these were more substantial chunks, and I chose to ignore the smaller, less important pieces. So originally, when I first started designing, when I first joined the company, the tool looked something like this. It was a little hard to use in terms of accessibility, in terms of it wasn't fully designed. It was very low fidelity. Like you can just see a bunch, like you can just see like 10 plus buttons here.
Right.
That makes no sense, right? So that is again to set the context of where the project started at and where we took it by the end of the 4 months. And to demonstrate how I was thinking, I tried to break it down into goals. So organizational goals and user goals to show that I can think not just about users but also about businesses. So over here with organizational goals, there were top three organizational goals was one is make users loyal advocates.
Right.
In this situation, our users were not our customers. So we also had to add value to our customers. And the third was that we had to iterate and fail quickly because it was a startup. So this was more on a higher level organizational goal and it was very important because they were hiring a lot of contractors who would just come in and pick up where someone else left off. So you need that transition to be very smooth for, failing quickly, learning quickly, building to learn. And so these were the different things that we discussed during the alignment. And then we went on site to Hyderabad for 1 week, I think, about 7 to 8 days, where we started looking at the different parts of the organizational goals, right? So how do we make our users loyal advocates? So what was the people problem that we were actually trying to solve? And the reason I specified it as a people problem is just to make it like really articulate, to be very specific about the what and the why and the how and for whom.
Right.
So that's also how I've structured the people problem, right? So like you have the design engineers, which is who felt like they were wasting a lot of their time, what, and on redundant and repetitive tasks. That's the how. Um, and this sort of sets the tone for the before and then the after. And we iterated a bit. I iterated a bit and settled down on this final how might we question, which was how might we create a solar design tool for solar engineers to evaluate sites in a productive manner. The reason that I specified productive manner was to create this guiding principle of sort about what is the key value that we're trying to bring to the users. And then I've also again covered the who and the what and the why and how. And based on this, I tried to come up with a metric that could validate whether or not we had solved the problem, had solved at least this part of the problem. And for the situation, which was time taken. And at this stage, it gets a little long where I kind of go into the different steps. So, for example, with editing, it takes about 45 minutes to edit our design layout. Okay, so this section I'm gonna like just quickly sort through because it's gonna get very long otherwise.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna dive into what was actually happening. I'm just gonna dive into how I've structured the portfolio. So here, I started off by describing the task and also specifying how much time it takes. And over here, I walk you through the process that they currently follow to accomplish this task.
Right.
And then follow that up with the reasons for why it is not an efficient process and this final solution that we came up with. This is then backed up by the new time taken. So that's kind of like establishing the old and the new again.
Right.
So I think that's a very recurring pattern that I followed over here. So again, I do shadow analysis. Total time is 90 minutes. What it was before, what it is now. Total time, 10 minutes. 3D to 2D, it used to take 90 minutes before, and then after. The after was that we kind of just integrated it into the software. So the total time goes down from 90 minutes to 0 minutes. And then there's stringing, 300 minutes process, what we changed, total time 30 to 60 minutes.
Right.
And so on. And then finally, I sort of just summed this up with, again, the before and the after. So like these are the steps. You can see it over here.
Yeah.
And then the total time taken initially, followed by the total time taken with the new process. And to really drive the message home, big text, how much time I saved. 9 hours of work, just gone, right? Um, and then I dive back into the process, because now that I feel like I've established a sense of okay, she has done some work. This has worked. This product has sort of worked. And now I dive into how we solved the second problem, which was iterating and failing quickly, uh, or actually just prioritizing what we've designed so far. Because when you're working with a small team, it is important to plan, right? You can't just go out and be like, okay, so we're just going to design all of this at the same time in this really unrealistic timeline. You've got to plan it out. And we tried a bunch of atypical processes there. We started off with just um, trying to see impact versus feasibility, but that didn't feel substantial enough. And eventually we settled on this process that Brian Chesky followed. Uh, have you heard the podcast Masters of Scale?
No.
No? Okay, so there's this podcast called Masters of Scale where Brian Chesky talks about how they were defining the customer's experience in Airbnb, where they would talk about like what a 1-star experience would look like, what a 2-star experience would look like, and they'd go on till 15 stars. So they have a realistic goal and they have their unrealistic goal. So that's kind of what we did over here, where we said, what would a 1-star experience feel like? That would be SketchUp plus AutoCAD. That's what they currently have. What would a 2-star experience look like? And eventually we settled saying that, okay, we need a 4-star experience. So this is how we prioritize. Like, this is what we're anchoring our product to, because this is what would add the most value to our to our users. And based on this, we started like listing out features saying this is P0, this is P1, this is P2, this is P3, and so on. And we also ran a co-creation study with our with our users, where we asked them to literally say, like, we literally put out the different tasks that they could do, and we asked them to say which of these is the highest difficulty and which of these is the highest priority, like which is the most important, which is the toughest to do. And based on this, I think the slides are misplaced. This was supposed to be above. And based on this, we prioritized our features with the levels and the status. So that was, and then at this phase, we started working remotely. I came back to Bangalore and they went back to Gurgaon. And this is when I really got into iterating and failing quickly, because this is when I started executing, right? So a few key problems, again, same format, where I go into 3 key problems, which is too many hands, faster development cycles are important, and seamlessness and consistency are key. I realized that the best way to deal with this, at least back then, what felt like the best way for me to deal with this was to design a design system. So over here, I kind of go into how we did that, the process of like what the guiding principles are of every element that we pick, and then following that up with what the final results look like. So over here, the next goal was to add value to our customers. Our customers weren't our users. Our users were way at the bottom of the food chain, versus our customers who were our CEOs who were deciding whether or not to pay for the software. And what would add value to our users is not what would add value to our customers. For them, it would often be business driven. It would often be money centric, or it would be output centric. So to deal with that, we came up with a bunch of strategies. I won't dive into them very deeply because, again, you would require, there's a lot of context involved. So we designed reports that would help them get better clients. We designed, we made cheaper tools that would have otherwise cost them a fortune. And we also simplified the process of talking to their customers, right? So we built we pitched an end product that would help them communicate with their customers. So that's how we added value to them. And finally, I summed this up with a wrapping up section, just to sort of substantiate what I've learned. So a few things that I learned were to be more conscious of my process. Is good design. Open communication and open files are very important, especially when you're working remotely, just to be able to be on the same page as the people you're working with, and to understand where you're falling short fast. And finally, estimating the time required for tasks, because I would often be like, yeah, I can do this in 2 days, but it would actually take me an entire week. And they'd just be like, are you okay? Can you, like, what is happening here? So that was, time management was a very important thing that I learned throughout. And that's about it. That's
That's a
how.
really in-depth project, and like hats off. That's a really good project actually, in my opinion.